Hello and good evening. Welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Duncan, and tonight I am joined in by Richard Thomson, who is the SNP MP for Gordon and has been an MP continuously since 12 December 2019 and currently undertaking the role of the Shadow SNP Deputy Spokesperson, Treasury Finance Secretary, Shadow SNP Spokesperson for Northern Ireland, and Shadow Spokesperson Wales. Good evening and you're welcome, Richard. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Anne, after a busy day down at Westminster. I hope you're well too.
Very expected, very expected. Right, I am going to go right to Ukraine update, day 239. Moscow-backed self-appointed officials in Ukraine's southern Kherson region have begun moving civilians into Russian territory, citing fears of a Ukrainian counter-offensive. Ukrainian officials described Russia's announcement as propaganda show and told people not to comply with the evacuation request. Andriy Yermak, chief of staff to the Ukrainian president, described Russian announcement as a propaganda show, as Kyiv said the population transfers amounted to deportations. Russia's recent admission that a difficult situation has emerged in the Kherson region is highly unusual and likely indicates that authorities are considering a major withdrawal of their forces from the area west of the Dnipro River, UK intelligence has said. Ukraine will begin restricting electricity supplies and rolling blackouts across the country starting from 7 a.m. today in response to Russia's strikes against the energy infrastructure. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has also said Russia's President Vladimir Putin was using energy and hunger as weapons, but has failed to break the West's unity and will not achieve his war aims through scorched earth tactics. NATO allies will act if Sweden or Finland come under pressure from Russia or another adversary before they become full members of the alliance. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said today. In his overnight address, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky urged residents not to comply with a military call-up in occupied areas. Russia's strikes on critical energy infrastructures are acts of pure terror that amount to war crimes, the head of European Commission Ursula von der Leyen has said. President Zelensky has spoken of significant results in downing Iran drones, claiming 233 Shahed UAVs and dozens of missiles were shot down during the month. The cost to Ukraine of downing kamikaze drone vastly exceeds the sum paid by Russia in sourcing and launching the cheap Iranian made technology. Analysis suggests the total cost to Russia of the failed drone attacks unleashed on Ukraine in recent weeks is estimated by military analysis to be between $11.66 million and $17.9 million. The estimated cost to Ukraine to bring down the drones stands at more than $28.14 million. The EU plans to impose sanctions on 3 senior Iranian military commanders and the company that develops drones believed to have been used in Russia's attacks on Ukraine. The European Parliament awarded the people of Ukraine its annual Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought to honor their fight against Russian invasion. Moving on, Liz Truss resigns. Liz Truss has resigned as Prime Minister and will step down after a week-long emergency contest to find her successor. She has announced outside Downing Street. It, it follows a turbulent 45 days in office during which Truss' mini budget crashed the market. She lost two key ministers and shed the confidence of almost all her own MPs. Her statement came after she met Graham Brady, the chair of the 1922 Committee of Backbench Tory MPs at Downing Street, followed by her Deputy Prime Minister, Theresa Coffey, and the party chair, Jake Berry. Truss said she had entered office with a vision for a low tax, high growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. She went on, I recognize that given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King to notify him that I am resigning as leader of Conservative Party. Opposition parties called for an immediate general election, saying the Conservative had no more mandate to govern. Keir Starmer said after 12 years of Tory failure, the British people deserve so much better than this re-involving door of chaos. In the last few years, the Tories have set record high taxation, trashed our institutions, and created a cost of living crisis. SNP Minister Leader Ian Blackford MP said it was inevitable Liz Truss would have to go after the damage she's inflicted. But merely swapping leaders of a broken Tory government is not enough. There must now be a general election. People will accept nothing less. The UK is in a state of constant crisis and long term decline, with all the Westminster parties signed up to the economic pain of a hard Brexit and austerity cuts. It is clear independence is the only way to keep Scotland safe and escape the chaos of Westminster control for good. Right. Richard, inviting you to this discussion. I saw on your latest Twitter you share this sentiment of it is not enough to be imposed another MP to become a prime minister, but there needs to be a general election. Share with us your thoughts and why you feel that way.
Well, and it's quite simple. There was a general election in 2019, which was the election that I was elected at myself. And excuse me, the Prime Minister Boris, at the time, Boris Johnson, was re-elected with a mandate to get Brexit done, as he put it. And of course, he didn't. And then Liz Truss stood to be the leader of the Conservative Party and the Prime Minister, saying that she also would resolve issues around about Brexit and would deliver a low tax, high growth economy. Now, both of these individuals, I would argue, were elected on a fantasy basis of fantasy economics and a fantasy in pursuit of a fantasy Brexit that can never ever be achieved in the terms in which they said it would. So we've already had two prime ministers who have been elected on a nonsensical basis of policies that it was completely impossible to ever deliver in any meaningful or truthful sense. Where I think we really do need a general election is, although we have the wonderful, in inverted commas, unwritten British Constitution, which doesn't require a general election, and because a Prime Minister is not directly elected but derives a mandate, if you like, from whether or not they're able to command a majority of support in the House of Commons, there's no requirement to have an election in strict constitutional terms. But I think politically, morally, there needs to be an election because it would be unconscionable for the Conservatives to foist two unelected prime ministers on us. But not just that, the fact that the mandate that they sought and achieved under Boris Johnson to deliver those manifestos, they've been tearing up the manifesto with trying to put up national insurance, and they've reversed on that, thankfully, but they're also trying to unpick they were also looking for a way through to try and unpick the triple lock on pensions, which is causing great alarm amongst our older, more senior population. So I think their manifesto is in tatters, their credibility is in tatters. There's been a complete breakdown of discipline within the Conservative Parliamentary Party. We saw that last night on a vote on fracking, which the Conservatives won, incidentally, and won by a substantial margin. But we saw some very distasteful accusations emerge that Conservative whips were manhandling people, or Conservative figures were manhandling their colleagues into the lobby to vote the way that the Prime Minister wished them to. And the Prime Minister, of course, failed to vote for her own party's position because she was too busy running after the Conservative Party's chief whip, who had just announced that she would resign. So she wasn't there in the lobby to vote, and that's why her vote wasn't recorded. So quite clearly, there's been a complete breakdown of discipline within the Conservative Party, and I think the only thing that can happen to restore some stability to the equation is to just hit the reset button, have a general election, and let people elect the representatives that they want, and then we'll see what the numbers are for the various policy prescriptions that are needed. But certainly the Scottish National Party has no fear of a general election, and will be seeking to put the Scottish interest to the fore in that to make sure that our voices are heard and our choices are respected.
Right. If we can just look at what you've said has been very well summarized by, different parties from the Labour leaders, SNP, and also the co-leader of the Green, Carla Dana. And she put it in the same words you have said, and she said first was when Liz Truss came in, there was a panic of the market reaction because of the unfunded tax cut. Then it went to mortgage costs rocketing, her firing her former chancellor, and then humiliated by Jeremy Hunt when he announced the scraping off of the tax cutting measures. Then final straw, what we thought was going to be the final straw was when when the Home Secretary resigned yesterday. Then now she decides to go home. So after Conservative MPs who rebelled, so do you think that the next prime minister will be able to stand all these things and correct what has happened?
No, I don't think you can, because the to use a metaphor, once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you can't put it back in. I mean, there was a complete breakdown in party discipline last night, despite the fact that the Conservatives won the vote. But I think that the damage is done. Their reputation for economic competence has been badly damaged by the events of the last few weeks under Truss's premiership. I mean, I think that reputation was highly dubious even before that, but she's put the tin lid on it, frankly. But their reputation or any semblance of political stability is also gone. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous just how quickly she's managed to eviscerate and evaporate her own political credibility. And I don't see that anyone else is necessarily going to come in and take that over, because the Conservative Party is now so divided between its various factions that I don't think that anything is going to bring them any kind of peace at all until they are defeated at the general election, because I don't see how it's possible for them to replenish an office in terms of personnel, in terms of ideas. They look and sound like a party that is broken, and in many ways they are. And I think the imperative is to make sure that the loudest and shrillest voices in that particular rump of opinion are not allowed to lord it over us until the very last minute that they're obliged to call an election. So, they may unite behind another leader. I think recent history suggests that that's not possible because there are always going to be groups and factions that are unhappy about how they're about things. They'll always be trying to push their own agenda because they'll know how weak whoever takes over will actually be. I'm just not sure it's possible to unite that party because it's a party that clearly does not wish to be united any longer. And the best thing to do is to hit the reset button because I don't think even St Francis of Assisi could bring peace and tranquility to that lot. They're just so far gone with their factional infighting, and there is nothing that will bring peace that can pour oil on those troubled waters forward.
Right. So with that, we're going to move to who will be the next prime minister. Less than 2 months after Conservative Party members chose Liz Truss to replace Boris Johnson as prime minister, the party has to select a successor to Liz Truss in an accelerated week-long contest. The contenders who have indicated they might stand or at least not ruled it out will now be seeking nomination from their Conservative MP colleagues. Expected to stand are Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor who was the runner-up in the previous contest, warned Truss repeatedly against an over-fast introduction to tax cuts and the subsequent market turmoil. Penny Mordaunt, the third-placed finisher in the summer leadership contest, is another seemingly near certainty to stand, and assuming she does, she will probably be seen as a favourite. Boris Johnson, some Tory MPs and especially party members would like to see the return of Boris Johnson. However, he is regarded by many as a tarnished figure, disliked by much of the country, and who still faces a formal investigation into whether he's misled Parliament over lockdown-breaking parties. Suella Braverman, she lasted a day less in her great office in state than Truss, resigning on Wednesday after using her personal email to send a confidential document to another MP. However, her ideology views on the more extreme right-wing make her prospects relatively slim. Kemi Badenoch, in the last leadership contest, campaigned on robust right-leaning views, and like Braverman, Badenoch has a reputation of being something of a culture warrior. Sajid Javid, he came a fairly distant fourth in the 2019 Tory leadership contest, but did not stand in the summer. Javid occupies a relatively fuzzy position near the centre of the Conservatives, although he did back Remain in the 2016 Brexit referendum. Grant Shapps. 2.5 weeks ago, the idea of Grant Shapps becoming Prime Minister would have seemed ludicrous, and to some colleagues it still does. But as of Wednesday, he is Home Secretary, which appeared almost equally unlikely. Ben Wallace, the Defense Secretary, has been getting on quietly with the day job and chaos ragged around him, with the same arguably increase in reputation, even by default. If he does stand, Wallace would have the appeal of seeming non-ideological and competent. Confirmed as not running are Jeremy Hunt and Michael Gove. So, before we dig into this any deeper, let's look at the history made by the previous or the former prime ministers or outgoing prime ministers' government or office. She was the shortest serving chancellor She had the shortest serving chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, then had the shortest serving home secretary, and now she's the shortest serving prime minister. So from that whole list of potential prime ministers, who do you think might be on the top 3 or top 2 of that list?
I honestly don't know. Rishi Sunak is the first name that comes to mind, but he's also been rejected by the Conservative membership at large. And I believe that although they're talking of having a threshold of 100 MPs needing to back a candidate before they can go forward, the Conservatives are intending to go to have a ballot of the membership. So having been rejected by them so recently, I'm not sure whether or not Rishi Sunak would wish to put himself forward for that, because certainly if he was defeated by that membership twice, it would be quite the humiliation for him. Ben Wallace, you mentioned. The difficulty I have with the idea of Ben Wallace as Prime Minister is, I mean, he's been a perfectly good Defence Minister and he's made all the right noises in Ukraine. Is that I remember him when he was a member of the Scottish Parliament, and actually, when you take him away from his comfort zone of defence, he's actually not very good. He gave an interview to the Spectator magazine's television channel a few weeks ago and tried to make some point about the health service in the devolved nations of Scotland and Wales, which the ambulance service was getting help from the army and the armed forces at that time. And he gave us a stern lecture about how the British armed forces weren't there to bail out Scottish and Welsh public services, completely oblivious apparently to the fact that the ambulance service in about 6 different regions of England was also getting similar help in the post-pandemic environment. So when it comes to politics that don't relate to the military, and even some of them that do, my gut feeling about Mr. Wallace is he's actually just about rubbish. He certainly wasn't a standout in Holyrood, and I think that the reason that he stands out to some extent at Westminster is probably because of the poverty of talent that surrounds that party. Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, has, I believe, ruled himself out. Michael Gove, I think, has probably had too many rejections. I'm not sure. Penny Mordaunt is somebody who was performing very well until she was rather brutally knifed, not just by the Daily Mail, but also by elements of Liz Truss's leadership campaign. So, Penny Mordaunt may fancy having another shot at it. Certainly, she's a very poised performer most of the time in the chamber. There were some suggestions that she wasn't a particularly effective minister when she was in ministerial office. I don't know about that, but certainly you would have to view her as a contender, and she was one of the very first person this afternoon to announce their candidacy once Liz Truss had announced her resignation. In terms of who else, well, Boris Johnson's name is being mentioned, but I think that I don't really think that's a starter. There are conservative, he remember the circumstances in which he went after it was exposed that he had lied to the Queen, he had lied to Parliament. There's still an investigation into his conduct over Partygate. And 60 MPs, 60 of his own ministers resigned from ministerial office, refusing to serve under him unless he resigned. So he is not going to be a unifying figure. And just because Liz Truss managed to make herself even less popular than Boris Johnson did as Prime Minister, I don't think that's going to make anybody nostalgic for a Boris Johnson comeback, apart from the most deluded of his supporters who in many respects have never accepted him having to leave office anyway. So if the Conservatives have any sense, they'll pick somebody new. And I think probably the two of the front runners at this stage would be Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt for the reasons I've given. Whether or not anyone else comes forward, I think remains who is seen as being particularly of the right of the party, I think remains to be seen. But the right have had their dream candidate the last two times in both Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, and they've blown it spectacularly. So certainly for those of us looking on from outside, a period of silence from the Brexiteer right would be very welcome indeed.
Right. Uh, Opposition parties are calling for immediate general election, saying that Conservatives have no mandate to govern. What do you think is running through minds of so many people, common men and women out there who, are stuck with worries of cost of living and all these other issues? Seeing this is
Well,
happening. Mm-hmm.
it's absolutely horrendous. I mean, this is yet another week that we're going to go through next week where we're not talking about the things that we should be talking about, which is how to tackle the cost of living crisis. And instead, we're watching the Conservative Party go through another convulsions as it continues its mental and political collective breakdown. We've seen the Conservatives crash the economy. We've seen that basic confidence that the markets might have had in the UK government be severely shaken. We've seen them come forward with a fantasy economic prospect of that Liz Truss had, and that being thrown out, having to be reversed in almost every single step. So I think what people are looking for is a government that is competent, and I think people right across. In Scotland, we reached a decision about the Conservatives a long time ago, but I think what's happened across England is that people have had one of those crystallising moments where they've decided that the Conservatives need to go. There was a similar moment such as that happened in 1992 when the Conservatives tanked the value of the pound on Black Wednesday, and they had to come out of the European exchange rate mechanism, and that completely exploded, as I say, any reputation or conceit that they might have kept for themselves about being competent at running the economy. So I think this is one of those crystallising moments, and it coincides with a Conservative Party that has been in power far too long. It's run out of ideas. It no longer has the personalities that can take it forward. There are too many talentless non-entities that have managed to worm their way up to the top of the pile. And frankly, they need an extended period in opposition. And they're just tired. They're knackered, and there's really no place for them at this point other than the political scrapyard, which is why we need a general election to, as I said earlier, hit the reset button in all of this, and let's elect a new parliament. Let's see where the majorities are for progressive opportunities, for progressive politics, and let's make sure the Scottish interest is placed right at the fore of that, because I think one thing we need to be absolutely clear on, the Conservatives, the way they've conducted themselves in Westminster, are absolutely no friends to people in Scotland. But the problem isn't just the Conservatives, it's the whole Westminster system of placing absolute power in the body of one party, and refusing to recognise the democratic legitimate aspirations of the Scottish people to empower their parliament further. And that's what we need to find a way to get away from. And I very much hope that the Supreme Court ruling provides that when they reach the end of their deliberations, because this is no way to run any country. It's certainly no way to run Scotland.
Right. Moving on to the next piece. Party before country. Will only Tory MPs or the whole party membership? Sir Graham Brady, the chair of 1922 committee of Tory backbenchers that decides the rule of leadership contest, said today that he hopes the process of electing a new leader of the Conservative Party will be conducted by 28th October, next Friday. Nominations for the Tory leadership election to close at 2 p.m. on Monday, with MPs voting later that day. MPs seeking nominations must reach a threshold of 100 supporters, which would limit the number of candidates to 3. Jack Berry, the Tory chair, said there would be an online ballot for members if 2 candidates were left after the ballot of MPs. If only one candidate reaches the 100 nomination threshold, they would be elected to be the next Conservative Party leader and become the next Prime Minister. So that's an explanation on how this might or should or will go, the journey to getting a new prime minister?
Well, yes, and I don't envy the Conservative Party managers who now have to go and make all of this work. It's they could certainly manage. It's going to be tolerably easy to find out who's got the support of 100 or more MPs in the House of Commons out of the Conservative MPs. That bit's pretty straightforward. But putting together an electronic ballot, and above all, a secure one, is going to be very, very difficult. And the GCHQ security service had to intervene last time because of concerns over the security of the ballot that was used to elect Liz Truss. So I think there's a very, very real risk that foreign actors might try and interfere with this, because it's not just about electing a leader of the Conservative Party, it's also about electing who's going to be nominated as the next prime minister. Now, you could say that the Russian state has directly influenced Brexit through funding, and there's other bad actors have been involved. You could say that because of the funding from dubious sources that's gone to the Conservative Party, there's already been a great deal of external influence exerted on who our prime ministers are and what they do. But I think that it's going to be very, very difficult to ensure a ballot that is competent, that people can have confidence in and be assured that it's a true reflection of opinion, and that it's been free from interference or, uh, or, or, or irregular voting. So that's going to be a very, very big task. But this just goes to show the problem that even if it is one member, one vote, look what they foisted upon us all last time. The Conservatives don't have a huge membership, and it's simply wrong, in my view, that such a small body of people who are so unrepresentative of the country they aspire at large that they aspire to govern, that they are then left with that final say in who gets to go to the palace, Buckingham Palace, to be appointed as the next prime minister. At least following a general election, there's been a democratic verdict, however flawed the electoral system is that delivers that. And there is a clear connection between the person who is leading the party, which has emerged with the largest number of representatives, and the policy basis on which they stood. So I think that even though it does go out to a wider group than just Conservative MPs at Westminster, that doesn't make it any more legitimate a process. In fact, in many ways, it makes it even less legitimate. And the best way forward, I think, is to have that general election.
Right. In the US, Arizona asks federal prosecutors to probe possible vote intimidation. In America, Arizona state officials have asked the U.S. Department of Justice to investigate a case of possible voter intimidation when a group of people followed a voter in Maricopa County who was dropping off a ballot at a drop box for the upcoming midterm elections. A spokesperson for the Arizona Secretary of State office, Sophia Solis, said her office had also asked the state's attorney general to look into the incident. The Justice Department confirmed it had received the referral but declined further comment. The voter was approached and followed by a group of individuals when the voter was trying to drop off their ballot at an early voting drop box on Monday, Solis said. Since his 2020 election defeat, ex-President Trump has continually repeated his false claims that he lost the election as a result of fraud. Even though multiple reviews by court, state election officials and members of his own administration rejecting all his claims. Despite the rejection of Trump's claim of voter fraud, the lie has taken root with around 51% of Americans and 71% of Republicans saying that they believe that voter fraud is a widespread problem, according to polling officials in at least 3 additional states: North Carolina, Colorado, and Nevada. The three have reported incidents of voter intimidation this election cycle, though it is unclear if any have led a criminal referral. In North Carolina alone, officials noted unusual aggressive observers during May's April election in 16 counties. Officials in Arizona have previously said they were aware of reports of voters being monitored when dropping off votes. Earlier in October, there were reports of many incidents of alleged voter intimidations being carried out by groups of so-called grassroots poll observers, many of whom have been recruited by prominent Republican Party figures and activists, a trend that has worried election experts and officials. In case throughout the US, an onslaught of intimidation and threats has pushed election officials to resign. Well, what do you make of this story of voter intimidation? Not, you know,
Well, I think that in any democracy, there's a number of conditions need to be fulfilled to say that it is that an election has been fair. And that doesn't just include the counting of the ballots, it includes a whole range of conditions around about the security of the election process, the security of the ballots, and the manner in which discussion and debate was allowed to take place. Also, who's get allowed to vote, who's restrained, who's inhibited from voting, whether that's because of very restrictive voting conditions or voting qualifications, or in the case that is being alleged here that voters have been intimidated by, by, by other individuals. So I think that it's important not only that elections and democracies are fair, but also that they're seen to be fair and that they can meet the highest possible standards. And I think if there's any suggestion that there's been any voter intimidation, whether it's systematic and widespread or whether it's on an individual basis, then that should be properly investigated by the relevant authorities because fundamentally there needs to be confidence in the process. And as we've seen from Mr. Trump and others, that there are those who, for their own ends, would seek to cast doubt on the outcome of electoral electoral contests when the results don't go the way that they would wish because they want to whip up their supporters and in this kind of post-truth world that is being created in some respects. They want people to believe these alternative facts, if you like. So if these allegations are made, then I think it's only right that they're investigated. And in many ways, it's often good, even because given how much of American elections are organised at state level, it's in many ways it's good that it would be a federal agency that is investigating these accusations because that way it's somebody from outside effectively, or at least drawing on an external authority other than the individual state that is going to investigate it and reach a conclusion.
right. Landlines, mobile phones, and internet out in Shetland. Extra resources are being sent to Shetland as Police Scotland works with partners to ensure the public can access emergency services during the outrage, which has been affecting some landline mobiles and internet services on Shetland today. Engineers are working to restore or divert services via other routes, and in an emergency, you should be able to call 999 from a landline or mobile, even if you don't have a signal from your mobile provider. Superintendent David Rose said, "We are working with partners to ensure people across Shetland have access to emergency services. Officers and vehicles from across Scotland are being sent to assist until normal service is resumed. They will be ready to be deployed on Friday, 21st of October, and will remain as long as necessary." Local police stations are open, and there is an emergency hub set up in the Tesco car park in South Road, Lerwick. Police are advising people not to make non-urgent calls for the time being, so that all available lines can be used for emergencies if required. If anyone cannot access 999 by phone, they should go to their nearest police station, ambulance station, fire station, or hospital to report an emergency, or try flagging down an emergency services vehicle that does not have its blue lights on. Officers are patrolling in vehicles and on foot will continue to make themselves available as well. In addition, I would ask that relatives and neighbors of elderly and vulnerable people check on them regularly. Assistant alarms may not be operating correctly, said Superintendent Ross. So, Richard, as someone who lives in a rural community, I'm sure you'd understand what the effects or impact of such a thing is. And it's very
Oh
nice
yes,
that,
and you
yeah.
don't have to go back too far. You only need to go back to Storm Arwen earlier in the year to where we had a situation where large numbers of people were cut off. Not just with the electricity, but with the communications as well, which,
Mhm.
and in many respects, it was the being cut off from communications such as telephone and the internet that was the thing that they felt the hardest because people who had broadband, when the router stopped working, so did the
Mhm.
broadband. If they didn't have a standard, the POTS telephone, the old-fashioned telephone network that we're all used to, the copper network. If they were reliant on fibre for their telephones, then that went down as well. And of course, mobile phone networks are reliant on fibre, so in many cases the mobile masts went down as well. But look, this is about Shetland, so
Yeah.
the cables quite unusually have been
Mhm.
damaged, it would seem, in two different places now. The working assumption is that it's happened accidentally, but
Mhm.
nevertheless, it's quite unprecedented for this to have happened, and extremely unusual that there would be two problems in two different places at the
Yeah.
same time. So
Mhm.
I believe that the connection to the Faroe Islands is planned to be repaired by Saturday. But in the meantime,
Yeah.
the measures that you've described are it has to go back to that kind of basic level to
Mhm.
try and provide assurance and safety for people. But I mean, certainly there will be other links that can be used for basic communication, such as the microwave links that I'm sure are still in place that
Yeah.
BT will be operating. But certainly, I
Mhm.
think it just goes to show how reliant we've all become on digital infrastructure and how much we miss it when, for whatever reason, it's not available. So I very much
Yeah.
hope that those additional resources that are going to Shetland can provide reassurance in the short term, but that
Mhm.
these faults in the cables are fixed and fixed as quickly as they can be, and that there's
Yes.
then some investigation into how this actually happened, because we need to know not only how it happened so we can do our best to make sure it doesn't happen again, but we
Yeah.
also need to look at if there are other issues of resilience, what sort of redundancy is there, and what other mechanisms can be used to provide the bandwidth that we
Mhm.
all need for our daily lives and for businesses to operate and to make sure that we can access urgent help whenever it's needed.
Yeah. We also understand limited capacity is being restored. Moving on, £65 million support for drug services in Scotland. Drug support services in Scotland are benefiting from a £65 million boost to drive down the number of drug deaths each year. Life-saving organizations which help people who use drugs turn their lives around and offer support to their families are invited to apply for the Scottish Government funding, which will help people on the road to recovery. The cash will go to initiatives like Aberdeen Alcohol and Drugs Action, which was given almost £500,000 earlier this year to deliver a sharp response service to people in their homes, ensuring they were given immediate access to advice to advise and support to help them get back on track. The money from the additional £250 million national mission funding is being channeled through the local support fund, which is open all year round, and two further funding pots, which are reopening today. The improvement fund for organizations delivering residential rehabilitation and associated services, and the children and family fund, which give financial support to those working with the loved ones of those affected. All funds are administered through the Cora Foundation, a charity which aims to make grants available to projects which make a difference to people and communities. Drugs Policy Minister Angela Constance said the number of lives lost to drugs is still too high in Scotland, and these funds are vital for those services working on the front line to help those affected and their families. These organizations save lives, and we want to support them so that they can extend as far into their communities as possible and offer people the support they need where they need it, when and where they need it. So that's really good support going out to people who are struggling with different struggles on drug use.
Yes, I would agree. I've said in many appearances now on Broadcasting Scotland that I don't think Scotland has one drugs problem. It has many different drugs problems which manifest themselves in different ways. And the Scottish Government's come under some criticism for its approach to drugs, but I don't think that anyone could seriously question the seriousness with which it's now being the problems are now being tackled, and these funds are a welcome example of how the Scotland's many problems are being tackled in terms of providing support not just directly to drugs users but also to their families. In terms of some of the money that's already been distributed, I believe one of the organisations that has benefited the Aberdeen Alcohol and Drugs Action organisation, they set up a group which has helped they were able to help over 150 different individuals, sometimes same day, which has probably helped to prevent a number of situations arising which might have led to drug users overdosing, and with the huge harm that it does to themselves physically, but also to those nearest and dearest to them. So I think that this is a positive step forward.
Yeah.
An example, an explanation of how the Scottish Government is seeking to tackle it directly, but also how it seeks to help those groups with real expertise and real life lived experience of Scotland's many drug problems, and how the Scottish Government has their back when it comes to trying to have the best possible impact we can to help people to turn around their lives and to come to tackle the many different multifaceted aspects of Scotland's relationship with drugs.
Culture Minister builds on Scotland's close connections with Ireland. Culture Minister Neil Gray is on two-day visit to Ireland with the goals of strengthening culture and academic cooperation between the two countries. As well as meeting with Irish Minister, Mr. Gray will meet researchers who have received funding through the Ireland Scottish Joint Bilateral Reviews Annual Network Grant to promote academic collaboration between the two countries. This has recently supported valuable research by allowing academics to better understand the role literature has played for children and young adults throughout COVID-19, particularly on their mental health and well-being. Speaking on arrival in Dublin, Mr. Gray said, "I'm looking forward to deepening our close relationships with Ireland on a range of topics of common interest. That includes discussions on exploring all options to ensure there is sufficient and safe accommodation for displaced people from Ukraine, and we are keen to share learnings on this with Irish ministers. Richard, I know this is an area that you're quite aware of, and as a spokesperson of Wales and Northern Ireland, that you'd be able to tell us a bit more about importance of such relations.
Well, I think it's important that we recognise the close links, but it's also important that we help people to discover and rediscover those links across the Celtic nations. Because I mean, I'm a traditional musician, and there's so many tunes have gone back and forward across the North Channel, not just to the Republic of Ireland, what's now the Republic of Ireland, but also to the counties in the north. And there are tremendous linguistic and musical links that go on there. And there's a certain element of shared history, but also shared modern experience. And I think it's good that we remind ourselves of these close links, and that we look to learn from each other. Look, a classic example. I was dealing with the Northern Ireland Language and Culture Bill a couple of weeks ago, and there's many members chose to use some of some words that are common not just to Scots, but also to the Scots language, but also to the Ulster Scots language. One that featured a couple of times was the word scunnered, in terms of how people felt about how the Conservative government was performing, which was quite amusing. But there was so that there are those links that people may not be aware of, and I freely admit that I wasn't fully aware of those links between Scots and Ulster Scots myself, and it's a language that 10% of people in the north speak, according to the latest census. But look, I'm going over to Dublin next week. To give evidence to the Irish Senate, the upper house of the Irish Parliament. But before that, I'll also be in Cavan for a meeting of the British Irish Parliamentary Association, which brings together not just EDs from the Dáil and MPs from Westminster, but MSPs from Scotland and Assembly members from Wales, and also from the Manx Parliament and the Channel Islands governments as well. And it's a good opportunity just to reflect not just on our shared cultural backgrounds, heritage, and inheritances, but also the common day-to-day problems, and how we're all dealing with things. Even something as straightforward, even something as like coming out of the pandemic, how we're dealing in our individual jurisdictions with that great shared common challenge. So I think it's good to foster these relationships, to have good intergovernmental relationships, but also it serves as a useful reminder to us all of the shared bonds that we have, which are certainly very, very strong culturally, and which interestingly don't require a single parliament in order to find them reflected. We're quite able to have common travel areas around these islands, and shared cultures and shared histories, without all needing to be sharing the same government. And I think that's to take it to its logical political conclusion. If we can have these relations with the UK government, can have relations with the Republic of Ireland that reflects that common history, though I'm sure we'll find a way to manage that when Scotland is independent as well.
Right. Krishnan Guru Mati taken off air for swearing about Steve Baker. Channel 4 News anchor Krishnan Guru Mati has been taken off air for a week after he was filmed making an offensive comment off camera about the Northern Ireland Minister Steve Baker. During an off-air moment after his exchange with Baker on Wednesday, Guru Murphy was heard saying, "What a cunt." He will not now return to Channel 4 News before 4th November due to a pre-existing week of leave, the broadcaster said. In a statement published on Thursday, Channel 4 said Channel 4 has a strict code of conduct for all its employees, including its programming teams, on-air presenters, and takes any breaches seriously. Following an on-air incident, Channel 4 news anchor Krishna has been taken off air for a week. After the incident, Guru Mati apologized to Baker on Twitter. He wrote, after a robust interview with Steve Baker, MP, I used a very offensive word in an unguarded moment off air. While it was not broadcast, that word in any context is beneath the standard I set myself, and I apologize reservedly. After calling for Krishnan Guru Mafi to be sacked, Baker later replied to Guru Mafi's tweet, accepting the apology and saying he appreciated the gesture. So, what do you make of this story and of Krishnan and his act and the response from Steve Baker?
Well, I mean, as Krishnan Guru Murthy has said, he shouldn't have said it. It didn't get broadcast, but as I understand it, but I think it just goes to show the dangers of saying things in front of microphones, because you'd never know whether they're on or not. And Krishnan Guru Murthy is not the first person to get caught out by saying something indelicate in front of a hot microphone. And obviously, I'm sure that nobody at Broadcasting Scotland would ever allow something like that to happen on air or off. But nevertheless, it's a cautionary tale. I mean, I can remember a few years ago when Henry McLeish was the First Minister, he and Helen Liddle started having a conversation about the then Secretary of State for Scotland, John Reid, in which a few undiplomatic things were said about him, and Mr. Reid milked it for all it was worth. So I think Steve Baker's done the right thing, accepting the apology. Krishnan Guru Murthy is an exemplary broadcaster, and I don't think we should allow one slip to cloud that. And I'm sure that once he's back on air where he belongs, that he'll be maybe a little bit more careful about what he says in front of microphones on the basis that they might be on and recording.
Yeah, hope it's a lesson well learned. So today is Kenya's Independence Day, since Kenya got its independence from the British colony in 1964. So being Kenyan, that is something that is so special. Today is a special day for me. And as I'm hearing from most Scottish or Scotland people, this is something they really, really envy. To you, Richard.
Yes, well, Kenya, obviously, any country's Independence Day is a great day for celebration, and I send my best wishes to everyone in Kenya and to the Kenyan diaspora all around the world, and I hope that they have a fantastic Independence Day, and I look forward to when we might also be able to celebrate ours in Scotland.
Right. Thank you so much. And it's been really nice having you today as our guest.
A great pleasure.
All right. Thank you. Well, that is it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So to everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programs will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us employ staff and make more programs. From me and everybody from Broadcasting Scotland, it's a good night and thank you for watching.